trying to stream on YouTube at the same time, and the camera wasn't working. And I remember what it was. I figured it out. Walaikum salam. Walaikum salam. Alif lam ra. كتاب أنزلناه إليك لتخرج الناس من الظلمات إلى النور بإذن ربهم إلى صراط العزيز الحميد الله الذي له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, I'm glad you did. Inshallah, we'll do it tomorrow too. وَوَيْلٌ لِلْكَافِرِينَ مِنْ عَذَابٍ شَدِيدٍ. Actually, let me turn this a little bit. There we go. That's better. الذين يستحبون الحياة الدنيا على الآخرة ويصدون عن سبيل الله ويبغونها عوجا أولئك في ضلال مبين. في ضلال بعيد وما أرسلنا من رسول إلا بلسان قومه ليبين لهم فيضل الله من يشاء ويهدي من يشاء وهو العزيز الحكيم. Subhanallah. وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا مُوسَى بِآيَاتِنَا أَنْ أَخْرِجَ قَوْمَكَ مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ وَذَكِّرْهُمْ بِأَيَّامِ اللَّهِ إِنَّ في ذلك لآيات لكل صبار شكور. Alaikum salam. Alhamdulillah. Let's start our class off, inshallah. Let me see. I think I got some water around here somewhere. Surah Al-Mulk. Now, this was Surah Ibrahim, Surah 14. So, inshallah, we're going to get our class going. Alhamdulillah. Thank you. Yeah, alhamdulillah. Now I'm not worried about it. Thank you. I know Hannah over there got my back. She got him up out of here quick. Yeah. So alhamdulillah. So in our class today, inshallah, we're going to talk about something that I think is a pretty simple concept in a way, but it's actually a really deep concept as well. I know you were, Hannah. No, I'm sure I know Hannah was. So I think that this concept that I want to talk about today, it's not like difficult to understand, right? But it's sometimes difficult for us to apply and to remember in our daily life. And I want to talk about today the concept of organic growth in the Qur'an. And let me explain to you kind of like some background on what made me think of that. What made me want to talk about that today is because I think a lot of times in our life, we rush things. We want things to happen right now. We want things to happen how we want them to happen, right? As opposed to how Allah might want them to happen, how they're playing out in the natural courses of events. So we want things our way, and we want it right now, and we want it to happen in this moment. We want instant gratification, right? And the reality is, if you really think about it, after 5, not usually. Well, today will be a little after 5. But so like what happens a lot of times if we're working on something, whatever that might be, whatever project that might be, we want to see the results immediately, right? And if we don't see immediate results, then that sometimes for us is kind of discouraging. So organic growth is something that's good to remind ourselves of, that in the natural world around us, things don't just happen all of a sudden. Like you can't, for example, you don't cram, like you know how you cram for a test, you don't cram a garden. You can't plant a garden at the last minute. There has to be time for the growth to happen, right? There has to be time for it to be watered. The conditions, the atmospheric conditions have to be right. There has to be time for sunlight. There are elements that have to happen for that growth to be produced. And I think if you think about it like that, if you think about it from the perspective of the natural world, then we can relate that back to us and say that when we um when we seek to have everything happen, our growth in our life, whatever it is we're trying to achieve, whether it's like we're doing in some of our workouts where we're going to get more in shape, be better, be more flexible, right? Whether it's that, whether it's financially, some things that you might be working on business wise, job wise, career wise, whether it's educationally, if you're working on your education, obtaining certain degrees, whatever that might be, whatever the goals that you're working towards, I think it's important to remember that real growth and real development takes time to happen, and it takes the elements to come together in order to make that the case, in order to make those things grow, right? And like I said, that's not a difficult concept for us to understand, but for us to apply sometimes is difficult. Because if we start to undertake a project, and as soon as we start to do it, say we might even wait a week or 2 weeks or a month, right? If we're trying to build a business, if we're trying to get an education, if we're trying to learn Arabic, whatever it might be, and we don't see the exact growth that we feel like we want or we should have, then immediately it becomes kind of discouraging. We're like, what's going on? What am I doing wrong? Why am I not growing? And we start looking at other people, right? We start looking at other people who are in that same field or doing that same thing. And we wonder, like, how are they having that much success and we're not having success? Well, there could be a variety of factors. Obviously, I guess that's empty. There could be a variety of factors that play into why they might be having their success. Wa alaikum salam. Wa alaikum salam. But one of those factors often is time and effort. That it takes a certain amount of time and effort. Alhamdulillah, I'm doing good to cultivate the necessary components to develop that thing. So it's good to remember, and it's something I have to always remind myself, because there's a lot of things that I want to achieve in life that I feel like is not happening fast enough sometimes, right? But it's good to remember this idea of organic growth, right? That real growth takes time. A lot of times when things happen fast, wa alaikum salam, there's not a lot of substance to them. Not all the time, but a lot of times. A lot of times when things happen immediately and fast, you don't find substance to that thing. It takes time for those things to really develop. So I want to share with you a couple verses in the Quran that I think illustrates that. Salam. Hey, Gonzo, salam. That I think illustrates this idea of things growing organically and naturally. So in the Quran, chapter 14, verse 24. Chapter 14, verse 24 is the first one we'll look at. So we're only going to look at really a couple today. Alhamdulillah. I think I look better without it personally, but thank you. I appreciate it. So chapter 14, verse 24, he says, Alam tara kayfa daraballahu mathalan kalimatan tayyibatan ka shajaratin tayyibatin asluha thabitun wa far'uha fis sama'. He says, have you not seen how Allah sets forth a parable? Kalimatan tayyibatan, a good word, loosely translated, a good word, a good kalima. Kashajaratin tayyiba. It's like a good tree. Asluha thabitun. Its root is firmly established. Wa far'uha fis sama'. And its branches reach to the heavens. Okay, now this is a deep verse. So I want to explore a couple points about this verse. So number one, just overall, if you think about this verse, salam, it's giving us that idea of organic growth. Like it's an analogy or it's a metaphor where Allah is comparing here, wa alaikum salam. Allah is comparing here the idea of a good kalima, loosely translated as a good word, with a tree that grows, a good tree whose root is firmly established and its branches reaches to the heavens, right? So he's given us an analogy or a metaphor of a good tree. That's the first thing. But the analogy is based on kalimatan tayyiba. Wa alaikum salam. Kalimatan tayyiba. So these are two words we want to understand more. The word kalima and the word tayyib, or tayyiba, which is the feminine. So the word kalima can usually be translated as like a word, right? But it's not just one word. Okay, so let me show you why I say that. So a lot of times people think of the word kalima as just one word, but the word kalima is not just one word. It can possibly be, but it's not just that. So in chapter 3, verse 64 is a good example of this. So in chapter 3, verse 64, he says, Ya ahl al-kitabi, Ya ahl al-kitabi, qul ya ahl al-kitabi, sorry, say, O people of the book, ta'alaw ila kalimatin sawa'in baynana wa baynakum, come to a word that is common or the same between us and you. Look at how he phrases it. Ila kalimatin. Ta'alaw ila kalimatin. He says, come to a kalima or a word that is the same between us and you. Now, what does he say after that? Allah na'budu illallah, that we don't worship except for Allah. Wala nushrika bihi shay'a, and we don't associate anything with him. Wala yattakhidha ba'duna ba'dan arbaban min dunillah, and that we don't take each other as lords besides Allah. Right? So in the beginning of the verse, he said, come to a word, a kalima. And then what did he say? He mentioned 3 sentences, basically, right? That we don't take each other as we don't worship except for Allah. We don't associate anything with him, and we don't take each other as lords. So he defined a kalima, a word, as basically like 3 sentences, like almost a whole paragraph. So a kalima doesn't have to be just one word. It could be a whole idea. This is a whole idea expressed in this verse. Does that make sense? So when we say the word kalima, a kalima can be a whole idea, a whole thought process, as evidenced by this verse. Okay? So here, when he gives us the example in 14:24, when he says, Alam tara kayfa daraba Allahu mathalan kalimatan tayyibatan. Do you not see how Allah says forth an example, kalimatan tayyiba, a good kalima? So a good word doesn't just mean one word. Now is not the time to talk about beards. Mathalan kalimatan tayyiba. He says, he says forth the example of a good kalima, a good word. Kashajaratin tayyiba. It's like a good tree, right? So when he talks about a good word, a good kalima, it doesn't necessarily just mean one word, a good concept, right? Now, what's the word tayyib mean? Because we're translating it as good, right? Sometimes they translate it as pure also, tayyib, right? But let's look at another place in the Quran to have a better or a deeper understanding of this word. So chapter 7, verse 58, I think gives us a really good understanding of this word. And then also the following verse from where we're at gives a good understanding of this word. So chapter 7, verse 58 says, وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبُ يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ. That, you hear the creepy ice cream truck? Yeah, he says, وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبُ يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ. He says, and the good land, the tayyib land, brings out its vegetation by the permission of its Lord. It brings forth. Oh, I knew I had another water. Sorry, hold on. I was grabbing the wrong one. I knew I had a water that actually had some water in it. So he says, and the good land brings forth its vegetation by the permission of its Lord. So here he calls it a land that is tayyib. A land that is tayyib. And what's the first description he gives of it? يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ. That it brings out its growth by the permission of its Lord. So one of the ways that we can think of the word tayyib then is something that produces growth, right? Does that make sense? Something that produces growth from this verse, right? Because he says the land that's tayyib produces its growth, its vegetation by the permission of its Lord, okay? So going back to 14:24, he says, let's look at this again. He says, subhanAllah, again, I love that. That's a beautiful saying. It's like a good tree. Even if it doesn't give people fruit, it gives it shade for sure. Or it gives shade. So here he said, Alam tara kayfa daraba Allahu mathalan kalimatan tayyiba. Do you not see how Allah sets forth an example, kalimatan tayyiba, of a good word, of a word that's tayyib, right? So based on the other verse, we can say a word or a concept, because a kalima, like we defined it, is not necessarily limited to one word, right? So kalimatan tayyiba, a good word, is a word or a concept that produces growth, right? It has the ability to produce growth. And what is he salam? And what is he related to? Kashajaratin tayyiba. It's like a good tree or a pure tree, meaning a tree that produces growth. Asluha thabitun wa far'uha fis sama. Its root is established and its branches reach to the heavens. And then look at the very next verse, very similar to the last verse that we read. Tu'ti ukulaha kulla hinin bi'idhni rabbiha. It gives its fruits at all times by the permission of its Lord. So a shajara tayyiba, a good tree, is described as what? Tu'ti ukulaha. It gives its fruits, right? So growth. And that's being used as an analogy to explain kalimatan tayyiba, a good concept. So therefore, a good concept, and Allah knows best, is a concept that is able to produce growth in our lives, right? So it's so beautiful here that the idea of a good concept is being related to something organic and natural that we can see in the world, something that grows in front of us, right? So, subhanAllah, yeah, plant seeds of good words and concepts. Exactly. SubhanAllah. So when you think about it like that, that's why I said I wanted to talk about organic growth, because a lot of times we want to rush our growth in life, right? And we think that the steps we're taking right now in our life aren't enough or something of that nature, like things just aren't working out for us. But here, if you look at how he compares a good concept to a good tree, it shows that a good concept takes time to grow, just like a tree takes time to grow, right? So if you have a good concept in your life, then it takes time to see that come to fruition. Does that make sense so far? Everybody with me so far there? Inshallah. And we can't always see the growth, right? Exactly. Right, for sure. We don't determine when we will see the growth. It could be beneath the soil, right? Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. It could be beneath the soil. The seeds are growing beneath the soil, right? So if that's what you feel like you're experiencing in your life, remember this verse, that things don't always happen all at once. Just like a tree, a good concept takes time to mature. So another verse I want to share, and I've shared this verse before, but I didn't give the verse number when we talked about it. I think we were just talking, and I kind of mentioned it in the course of the conversation. So today I want to make sure I give you the verse number. So this verse number is going to be chapter 2, verse 261. I like that, being dark like under the soul. That's beautiful. Chapter 2, verse 261. So in chapter 2, verse 261, he says this is another example. So the Quran gives us, that's another beautiful thing that relates to this topic. The Quran is always giving us examples from the world around us, right? So that tells us that growth should be organic because it's about the world around us, right? So he says here, مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ كَمَثَلِ حَبَّةٍ. Or the example of those who spend their wealth in the path of Allah is like the example of a seed. Gives the example of a seed. So in spending their wealth, their amwal could be anything that they own, anything that they have, anything that they possess. It doesn't just have to be material. So he says here is like the example of a seed. أنبتت سبع سنابل. It grows 7 ears. One seed grows 7 ears. في كل سنبلة مئة حبة. In every seed, in every ear is 100 seeds. So one seed grows 7 ears, and in every ear is 100 seeds. And what does that mean? One seed develops into 700 additional seeds. So, subhanAllah, look at that growth that Allah draws our attention to. That if we just plant one seed, yeah, exactly. Well, because the verse says after that, Wallahu yudha'ifu liman yasha, and Allah multiplies for whomsoever He wills, right? So look at how beautiful that is. That if you just plant one seed, it will grow 7 ears, and each ear will have 100 seeds. So 700 times from that one seed. That's so beautiful, right? So I think what that tells us then is it draws our attention, first of all, to the importance of planting seeds, as we've been talking about. That the seed exists under the soil and it has to grow, but also the seed grows many, many, many more times than just that one seed. So that's an encouragement, I think, for us to continue doing the things that we're doing, because we're planting seeds. Whereas even if we don't see the results of what we're doing, someone down the line might see the results of what we're doing. Alhamdulillah. Someone in the future might benefit from what we're doing because we planted the seed, right? And I think another thing to connect this to that's interesting is the idea of going from darkness to light. There's several different places in the Quran that talks about going from darkness to light, like Allah bringing us from darkness to light. The book brings us from darkness to light, several different places. What I think is interesting about that is a lot of times we might think that darkness is something bad, right? Because He's saying He brings us from darkness to light. But what if it's not necessarily bad? What if that's just part of the journey, that you have to start in darkness and that brings you to light? But what's bad is going the other way, because He says there are certain people and things that will take us from light to darkness. So maybe that's what's bad, going the other direction, right? Going back to darkness. But starting in darkness is normal, it's natural, right? And look at how He describes here in this verse. In chapter 6, let me give you the verse. In chapter 6, verse 59. Chapter 6, verse 59. This is so beautiful. He says, for sure, exactly, yeah, that's my point. So look what He says here. وَعِنْدَهُ مَفَاتِحُ الْغَيْبِ لَا يَعْلَمُهَا إِلَّا هُ. And with Him is the keys of the unseen that none knows except for Him. وَيَعْلَمُ مَا فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. And He knows what's in the land and the sea. وَمَا تَسْقُطُ مِنْ وَرَقَةٍ إِلَّا يَعْلَمُهَا. And no leaf falls except that He knows it. Listen to this part. وَلَا حَبَّةٍ فِي ظُلُمَاتِ الْأَرْضِ. Nor any seed in the darknesses of the earth. He refers to a seed, فِي ظُلُمَاتِ الْأَرْضِ, in the darknesses of the earth. So a seed has to exist in that state of darkness in the earth in order for it to sprout and to grow. And again, that's organic. It takes time. It doesn't just happen. And a lot of it, like Rose pointed out, happens underground, right? So in the same way, our growth, a lot of it happens in the darkness too, but not the darkness that we think, the darkness of people not necessarily seeing it. Just think of like a professional athlete, right? We watch the game and we see what they do in the game and we're like, oh man, wow, like he's amazing or she's amazing, whatever we're watching. But do you realize how much work they had to put in the darkness when people weren't watching in order to be that amazing? They had to work to get to that point. It didn't just happen like a butterfly in the cocoon. Exactly. There was a period that they have to work in order to get to that point. So it's so beautiful here in this verse in 659 that Allah describes وَلَا حَبَّةٍ فِي ظُلُمَاتِ الْأَرْضِ, nor a seed in the darknesses of the earth, right? Because a seed has to exist within that darkness in order to sprout life, in order to grow. So in the same way, that's how we have to exist, and the things that we're working on have to exist in order to grow, right? We can't have growth without that. So this insight of thinking about these verses like this in the Quran kind of hit me when I was just thinking to myself. I just had this thought that came to me. I said, a lot of people talk about being real. They say, they like to refer to themselves as a real person or a real one or stuff like that, right? Or I'm the realest, right? But I was thinking, what really makes a person real is oftentimes very subtle and very hidden. It's not the when you walk into a room and you're meeting new people, the people that are the loudest and draw the most attention a lot of times, not necessarily all the times, but a lot of times they're not the realist. A lot of times the realists are the quieter ones, the more subtle ones, the ones that are kind of in the dark because they don't feel a need of having to prove themselves because they have depth of knowledge and depth of character that speaks for itself. So that's why this study kind of hit me because I started thinking about these verses and thinking about the real ones are organic. They grow organically, slowly over time. And Allah knows best. That's all I really wanted to share with you today. I don't really have a long class today, but I just wanted to share with you that encouragement because I was thinking about it for myself too, and it encouraged me. So I thought today would be just kind of like a brief reminder um, or a brief inspiration that if you feel like that, to just keep going and don't get discouraged and think because you don't see the results all at once, that doesn't mean that they're not coming. And Allah knows best. Alhamdulillah. Hopefully that was good for everybody. Inshallah, it's also recorded on YouTube, so you can go back and watch it. And inshallah, in the morning, we're going to get it in. We're going to get a workout. Yeah, that was a little bit shorter. It's about almost 30 minutes. So it's about half the time that we usually do. But it's my day off, so I'll just do a short class, and I'm going to relax for the rest of the day, inshallah. Um, Tomorrow I have to work, so it'll probably be an hour. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum. I'll see you guys later, man. Have a good day. Let me end this over here. For sure. It doesn't always have to be. We like